All right, everyone, welcome to Block Party. I'm your host, Mike Wall. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying, hit that subscribe button on our Process to Perform channel on YouTube. Let me know. You can hit me up, MikeWall68 on Twitter or TikTok, Process to Perform on Instagram. Listen, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. I know the draft's coming up. We've gone through a lot of different tape. We've talked film on, I think, offensive, defensive linemen, edge players, linebackers, off the ball linebackers, safeties, everything under the sun. But I got this email from, let me back up. First of all, let's thank our sponsors, betonline.ag, for doing this, helping us produce this show. BetOnline remains your number one source for our NBA playoff betting this season. Get your analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. You'll find the latest odds, bracket contests, team matchups, and game trends at betonline.ag. Updated odds for everything from live games to conference championships, right through the NBA Finals. BetOnline is your NBA headquarters this season. So head to the website on your mobile device and sign up to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Be sure to use our promo code BLEAV, that's BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your bonus. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. I got this really interesting email from somebody who listens to the show, and Gunner from Houston, thanks for sending that. And he asked some questions that, quite frankly, I just thought this might be a good podcast to go through as we're coming up on the draft. We're talking about the offseason. A lot of this is going to be Packers-centric, but it really applies to anybody that is out there watching in the National Football League or really any team sport in general. This is how a lot of players think about it, maybe the thought processes of some of the people in the organization. So the first question that Gunner had was really, how do players develop in the offseason in this current climate? And I think, particularly when you're talking about the National Football League, you're talking about even collegiate football. The availability of players in the building is far less than it ever used to be, as far as what can be required from the teams. Now, back in the day, when I was coming up in Green Bay, we did not have off-season conditioning. At least there wasn't any mandatory. There wasn't any wink mandatory. There was, voluntary mandatory. There was nothing. We had 2 3-day mini camps. We had an 8-day mini camp. That was it for the entire offseason. And then we'll see you in July for training camp. And we managed to get all our lifting done. We managed to we learned the playbook, everything that was required, we managed to do, which begs the question, how necessary is everything that we're talking about now? Having said that, for years, there was voluntary, mandatory off-season training. I did it when I was in Carolina for a spell, did it in Seattle. And that evolved from just going in and say, hey, you have to get the weight workouts here. Basically, a lot of teams were, first of all, just making sure you worked out, because there'd be some players in the National Football League, believe it or not, that didn't want to work out in the offseason. And we had guys in Green Bay, we had assistant strength coaches who would have to get on planes once every 2 weeks and fly to these different cities in different states to get one workout with a valued player on the Packers roster, just to make sure that the position coach, the coordinator, the head coach was comfortable saying, at least we know they're doing something once every 2 weeks. Think about how ridiculous that actually sounds, knowing that these guys are professional athletes getting paid what they get paid. But for a while, that was something that they dealt with. And now what happens? You evolve from, okay, we need you to get your workouts in here, to, the coaches are sitting around going, well, there's a lot we could teach these guys if we just had more time. So then the coaches started sneaking onto the field and in the classroom. And all of a sudden, it went from maybe you're there for 2 or 3 hours a day just getting your workouts in, to let's try to make this a 6-7 hour a day deal, 4 days, 5 days a week, whatever the case may be. And players started pushing back going, man, I don't want to be a part of, the value that this is adding to my career is not worth what we're going through. In other words, maybe I feel I can get this on my own. Maybe I feel that I don't want to spend that much time in the building. I don't want to be around these people, because football is an intense sport. And especially from a player's perspective, you're under the gun for a long time during the regular season and the postseason. And you might not want to spend all that time with the same people year round, especially if you feel like you can get accommodative help and development somewhere else. So then what we know now is the current CBA is pared that down a little bit, but you can still have this voluntary, mandatory CBA or OTAs where they can, train, they can meet, they can do a bunch of stuff, and then the phases through, and maybe you get a little on the field work, and then you go into mini camps, and it's not as invasive maybe as it used to be 15 years ago, but that you're still doing a lot of time there. Having said all that, the amount of padded practices are down in training camp and regular season. The amount of hours on the field are down in training camp and regular season. And so coaches are forced to try to figure out, and players are trying to figure out, I have all this time here in the building. Like, they can still keep them there as long as they want. You can keep a rookie, I think, during OTAs for 8 or 9 hours a day. But you can't get them to physically do work. I mean, you're not allowed to physically work them for that long, obviously, and that wouldn't be beneficial one way or the other. There's just not a lot of on-field time. So the question was, how do you, as a player, evolve or develop in this current CBA climate? And the answer, truthfully, is unless you're at one of the very, very few places that just has it down nails, and you feel very comfortable with what they're doing, and the workouts are specific to your needs as an individual, not just your position group, or not just your dimensions, a big, a mid, or a small skill. Unless they have guys working with you for technical work all the time, or watching film all the time, and you're doing it kind of on a schedule that makes sense for you as far as what you're trying to get out of this offseason, you're trying to get bigger, faster, stronger. The majority of really good players now go to different facilities, meet with different coaches in the offseason, and they go train outside of their team facility, at least while they can, until this voluntary mandatory stuff happens. And there's a ton of places across the country that are really good, both individual development coaches you talk about from the quarterback standpoint. You have guys like Quincy Avery, guys like Jordan Palmer, Carson Palmer's younger or older brother. I don't know actually now to think about it, but I think his younger brother. They're kind of famous, renowned quarterback coaches now. Guys like myself, guys like Charles Bentley work with offensive linemen. Duke Manyweather works with offensive linemen. There are places like Bomarito's down in Florida. House of Athlete, I think, has a couple of facilities in Florida now, run by former NFL wide receiver Brandon Marshall. They've got a bunch of guys that come together and are just putting in work. Roy Holmes is working the one in Miami. He was an exo strength coach. He's a phenomenal development coach. So if you're trying to get bigger, faster, stronger, that's a place that you want to show up and work with. Not only that, but you're also getting to mind meld and integrate with all these players across the league in different buildings, learning different things, hearing things from different voices. Because even if you're running the same scheme as somebody across the country, that coach, that coordinator, that quarterback, they're going to be implementing that with different language, different thought processes. Even the repercussions are the same. Something might hit different to your ear. Something that I do in preparation might not be something that you do in preparation. And we can learn from them, and bringing all those people together in one place voluntarily, like you're actually paying money in most of these cases to go work with these people, right? You're just going to get a ton out of that. I think one thing that you always think, just generally speaking, when if you're looking for career education development, most of the time, if you have to pay for it, you're going to find it more valuable. If someone's forcing you to go, that's usually because you don't find it as valuable, right? For whatever reason. And that's not the fault of anyone except for the limitations that they've put on through the CBA, what they've put on the buildings. And I mean, quite honestly, guys like me who are just focused on developing the offensive line position, or developing a linebacker position, developing technical mastery and film study. Like, I don't have to worry about putting together a scheme. Like, I can talk scheme, but I'm not an expert at scheme, or the scheme that a specific team's running, like that specific team's coaches. So all my time's invested in how am I going to get you better? And I'm talking about the guys like myself, the guys like me, the guys that are in a position I'm in. So I'm going to naturally just have an advantage against a coach that's necessarily maybe in because I can focus all my efforts on getting that 1, that 2, that 4, that 5 people to play at a much, much higher level from an individual standpoint than maybe you can when you're in a building. So I hope that answers that question. And it's not a perfect science, but I'll be interested. This kind of rolls into the second question. I'll be interested if that ever starts becoming part of what teams want to do. I made a proposal years ago to a team. Why don't you hire these, we'll just call them private care people, facilities, to help prepare your athletes for what we'll just call public, or the organization's service when we get into training camp and everything, because these people can do it with the way that the structure is set up now. The private facilities, the house of athlete, the Bomberinos, guys like myself, we can do a superior job of developing players that want to actually go out and be developed, because we just have much more time to focus specifically on that, right? We're not a generalist, we're a specialist in a very unique skill set. That rolls into the second question. I think this was this plays in well. There's no salary cap for coaches, and so the Gunner's question was, well, why don't they just hire more staff? And it has nothing to. It's a good question, but the fact of the matter is, you could create some partnership with the House of Athlete. You create some partnership with a guy like me. I could come in and have worked on a consulting basis. But there's a couple problems that seem to be evident, right, when you think about that just from a realistic standpoint. First and foremost, you're paying coaches. If you're the owner or the president, you're paying coaches a ton of money. Even though it's not salary cap money, it's still, you're writing big checks to these guys to develop the people that you draft and bring in free agency. And because of that, they have a responsibility. If their job isn't done well, then they're going to get fired. Now, the contract's guaranteed, so they can go look for another job. But that there's a responsibility there that I, as a consultant, don't necessarily. I feel the same as far as the responsibility to do my job at the highest level. Otherwise, people won't hire me. But I don't have the loyalty to that or that team. That team's not going to pay me as much money. I'm not going to hold the same status in that building because I'm only going to be there 2 days a week, whatever the numbers. When I say me, I'm talking about the private groups out there. And so there's going to naturally be tension between the people that are there to coach the wide receivers in season and the guy who's coming in to help coach them in the offseason, right? And you can send them away, and we can start talking about, is there a different language? Is everybody doing best practice? What's good for me is not good for you. I tend to think that, listen, if you're teaching the guys to move better in the context of what their positional requirements are, you're going to develop talent, and it doesn't matter what language system you're using, what scheme you're using. If they're moving better across from a mechanical standpoint and they're processing faster, they're going to be better. Better evolved humans make better athletes, make better players. It's very, very simple. And so that's why strength and conditioning is so important. That's why position development is so important. But to just bring people in summarily and say, this is what we're going to do, if they just, let's say somebody just said, hey, we're just going to hire LaCharles Bentley, and he's going to work in the building. Well, you can't do that, because all of a sudden, once you hire that person, they're going to fall under the CBA, and all of a sudden, all the work they're doing is going to be greatly limited. Now, you can get around that a little bit by going through the strength coaches, because they get a little more time with the players. We had a great operation going in Miami with Dave Bloch and his staff, where we would start doing a lot of skill development during OTAs through the strength conditioning program, because I was part of the performance umbrella, and so I could teach those guys exactly how all the decelerations, acceleration work, everything they were doing on the strength conditioning side really translated to a lot of the positional requirements for different positions in the sport. But that's why you don't just summarily go, you know what, we're just going to hire more guys because we can afford to. What you have to, and the other thing is too, that this is the good old boys club has never been stronger than in the National Football League. You hire your friend, you hire somebody you were on staff with before, you hire your son, you hire your brother-in-law, you hire your old high school weight room coach. I mean, this stuff, it doesn't matter. It's like the most qualified people aren't necessarily going to get the job. Now, hopefully a lot of times they do, but if they don't, then they learn on the job. And there was a great article about Bill Belichick's son, Steve, who, when he walked into the safety room, I mean, clearly he knew he didn't belong in the safety room when he got the job at first. And he handled it extremely well. I mean, he's probably going to turn out to be a head coach somewhere and do a great job over the course of his career. But at some level, you do go, well, that's interesting that, and Coach Belichick certainly earned the right to do whatever he wants, but it is interesting if you're like a 9-year or 10-year veteran in that room, you're going, you brought who in to coach to make me better? Because this is still my career. Like I'm still trying to win Super Bowls. I'm still trying to go to be an all-pro, get a new contract, all that kind of stuff. And so you hope that the person in that room is super overqualified to do the job, not underqualified. So it is an interesting conundrum, but so we go. And to wrap and to ask that, the question was also directed towards specifically the Green Bay Packers, and we were, he was trying to understand who, if any, are the developmental coaches on that staff. And so I kind of wanted to give a Packers history of kind of how we got here. When Aaron Rodgers is going to leave, you're going to have this first time in 30 years, you're not going to have a Hall of Fame quarterback, we don't think, and what that looks like right now. So you remember when Matt LaFleur got hired? Matt LaFleur had spent time, and I think this was really in the moment where if you had had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay at some point, you were going to get serious consideration. That wasn't necessarily why people got hired, but let's face facts as far as the number of people that were coming off of not necessarily even his staff, but had been in a building with him at some point. Owners were super excited because Sean he's an absolute unicorn to be as young as he was when he got hired, with his IQ, his football intelligence, his emotional IQ, his leadership abilities. He's very, very rare. And so I think a lot of people are trying to strike, lightning in a bottle twice. But he had spent time with not only Sean McVay, but Mike Shanahan. He had one season calling plays, I think, for the Tennessee Titans before he came into Green Bay. So very young, inexperienced play caller. Did have a season under his belt, but inexperienced play caller. If you remember, if you're a Packers fan, you'll remember that there was a lot of questions when he got hired because he was hired darn near on the spot. Usually you go through rounds of interviews, and it seemed like I think he must have crushed it at his one interview, and then he was almost hired before they started bringing in some other people. He didn't have a second interview. He didn't go around the building and start, traditionally you go around the building and you start meeting the equipment guys and meeting everybody that's on staff now and meeting the strength coaches, etc. But I don't believe any of that happened. I believe it was first interview, and they hired him pretty quickly thereafter. And then you remember, obviously when that happens, the question is, especially with a veteran quarterback who probably knows more about football at this stage than any young first-time head coach they're going to bring in, who is going to be the counterbalance to your youth and your exuberance, who has a little bit of experience in the building. And so you remember Sean McVay brought in Wade Phillips, who at the time I think he was damn near 80 years old, but it was a great counterbalance to his youth. On the offensive side of the ball, I think Todd Clements was an older gentleman at the time. I know he left and now he's back again, but I think he was the quarterback's coach, and I don't remember how old he was when he got drafted. But if you look at the staff, kind of an older gentleman that probably helps in meeting rooms, helps to just have somebody there who, it can be collecting retirement. Let's call it what it is if they want to be at that point. I just think that's a very calming thing. So Matt comes in. His original defensive coordinator was Mike Pettin, who was left over from the McCarthy staff, which in itself was kind of odd. Now you can probably say, look, the defense had been doing okay. That he's probably doing that to maintain some continuity. But it was a little bit odd to not, given how that they weren't like a top 5 defense at the time. It kind of an interesting move. The original special teams coordinator was Sean Meninga. I think he was from Jacksonville. And then Nathaniel Hackett was the original OC. And remember, Matt calls plays. So you kind of have to figure out what your OC does. And you kind of recall, as opposed to like Andy Reid and the Chiefs, Eric Bieniemy is the one kind of relaying all the information on the sideline. We didn't necessarily see that in this case. Not that that's the way to do it. It's just there are some different ways. So you kind of have to figure out what Nathaniel Hackett does in the moment, because he's not necessarily calling plays, even though he's the offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that person does. But I also think that probably detracts from that person's authority. Like if you're not calling the plays and even at the OC, then you're not really the guy. And so you kind of wonder how all this stuff happens. Now, obviously, Mike Penton underperformed. Sean Meninga underperformed. And so in 2020, they got rid of both those guys. And for special teams, they just promoted in-house. They brought Maurice Drayton. They hired him to be the special teams coordinator, who was an assistant to Meninga. And at that point, you're essentially saying what? You're essentially saying we've got the guys, we have the system, and there was something that Meninga was doing in the way he ran meetings, or because you're not really calling that much crazy stuff. The way that you're running meetings or practices is wrong. Is the reason that we're not having success. That's always interesting. Like that person in front of you is not moving up to become moving to another team to elevate their status, like becoming a coordinator to a head coach, an assistant to a coordinator, etc. If that's not happening, if you're doing it because it's a performance issue you think is the guy, the only question you can ask, and I don't know enough about the situation, but just generally speaking, the only question you can ask is, what habits did Meninga pass on to Maurice Drayton that are going to be detrimental to the team developing in the special teams area? And as it turns out, Drayton didn't do a great job, and now we have Rich Bisaccia. And last year, before Keyshawn Nixon became Keyshawn Nixon with our team, and it took Bisaccia had him on his team in Las Vegas. I think he's been in the league for 3 years before he kind of had this breakout performance, and it wasn't like he was a rocket ship there, and all of a sudden we just decided not to play him here. And we had drafted the kid out of Clemson a couple of years ago, and so we were giving him a chance. But Bisaccia's special teams in Green Bay were bottom 5 until Keyshawn Nixon got in the game. And all of a sudden we got down to 21, 22, something like that. So we're just right around average. And Bisaccia is probably the best coordinator on the team right now. But you wonder, when we talk about development, you just wonder very simply if he's the best guy on the team, and all these great things happened in Las Vegas when he became interim head coach. Everybody thinks a lot of him. Then you wonder that, okay, what else could it be that we're not as good as we maybe should be in that position? Is it just takes some time? Is it that he doesn't get the sometimes at the special teams position, you don't get the time or respect from the rest, the offensive, defensive parts of the building. And so maybe your practice time or your meeting time or whatever it is eats into it. Maybe defensive coordinator, and I'm not saying this is happening, but maybe you can see where maybe some of the top safeties and linebackers, so they're pulling them out. Hey, you can't play special teams, even though maybe they should be playing special teams. So there's a lot of different things that go into special teams, because a lot of times you got 4 core guys that only play special teams, and everybody else is kind of you're taking from offense and defense. So there's a bunch of things you can go there, and certainly Bisaccia looks like he's got a great track record, and people seem to certainly think he's a great coach. The other hire was they hired Joe Petty, and there was a relationship there between Matt and Joe Barry, and he was the Rams linebacker coach under Sean McVay. So there is a relationship there. Now, it's that defense is severely underperformed, and I think if you're a fan, if you're a cynic, you're going to say, "Well, I can't believe he's still here." If you're a fan, you're going to look back and go, "Well, they did good against that Vikings team, and they played a little bit better towards the end of the season. Maybe they're going to, maybe some things are going to change, and we're going to be headed in the right direction. Next year, there'll be that top 5 defense that certainly they've drafted in a top 5 way as far as the talent they have on the field, and some free agent moves, obviously, with guys like Devondre Campbell. But at the end of the season, when they start talking about, are we going to make any changes in the coaching staff? Are we making coordinator changes? Everybody's talking about the defensive coordinator position. Matt says, absolutely not. You have to wonder what the priority is. And this is kind of goes back to the earlier talk is, what is the priority when we're hiring certain people? Is it to develop these guys? Is it to, be a good soldier in the LaFleur Army as far as the staff? Is it to, I mean, it's probably to do all the above, right? But like, what is the priority? The other thing that happened last year that kind of might go unnoticed for some is that Adam Stenavich, who I thought did a phenomenal job the 2 years prior in the offensive line room and what he did, especially with some of the younger guys and some people having to play because of injury. He gets promoted because Nathaniel Hackett takes the job in Denver. He gets promoted from offensive line coach to offensive coordinator because Hackett's going to take Steno and give him a promotion. And that's the only way that he's allowed to leave the Packers is if you offer him a promotion. So they promote him to offensive coordinator. And the issue, if there is an issue, is it's kind of an undefined position with coordinator. Again, you're doing a ton of stuff behind the scenes, but now you're not in direct control of the 5 out of 11 people that are on the field all the time. So you're losing what I think is probably your best resource on the offensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective. You're losing your best assistant coach in Steno because he's no longer going to be part of the offensive line room, at least on a consistent basis. So they're losing that voice. They're losing that attention to detail. They're losing the way he goes through practice. You aren't necessarily gaining, at least it didn't appear that you're gaining that much innovation or kind of way we do business by putting Steno at offensive coordinator as opposed to Nathaniel Hackett. Because, again, Matt LaFleur, this is his offense. This is the offense that he calls. So I think there's, a limited amount of, even if they're drawing everything up because Matt's so busy, just, understanding how Mike Holmgren used to do this, just the interaction between all those coaches, ultimately there's going to be plays in the game that, at that time probably Aaron wanted, but plays that Matt wants and is going to call. So it's like you're not really taking over the offense. Like the changes aren't going to be that severe. And you probably don't want to be that severe because you've been 13-3 3 years in a row. And, obviously you've had success and Aaron's playing at an extremely high level. So all of that makes sense. But you do lose arguably your best position coach and all the development that went on in that room to a new guy, first year as the guy in the room, Luke Buckus. And Luke's been around the block. Listen, I know Luke was in Illinois. I know Luke was in Jacksonville years ago. I think he might have been in Pittsburgh as an assistant. But it's different. It's certainly different. The way they go about business is different. And I don't know if I think, sources told me that he didn't spend that much time on the field with those guys because he doesn't want to probably step on toes, which makes sense. But they certainly didn't perform at the level they did the year before. Part of that's probably personnel, but a couple guys that were there kind of both years took a step back. So you have to start going, all right, are we doing everything we can from a development standpoint for those guys? And again, you look at this from a fan's perspective, but then look at it from the player's perspective. You take out probably arguably the best coach in the building from a development standpoint, and you put in anybody else, the players are going to go, well, wait a second. How is this good for my career? And those guys have careers too, and everybody has to consider that. But you just have to make sure that the person you bring in is at least as good, if not better, than the person that's leading. And so we just always have to make sure that's the case. So I hope that answers your questions on Green Bay. The bottom line is, if you're saying who are the great development coaches, well, the only one I know that certainly is the offensive coordinator right now. And he's not really developing anybody because he's not a guy who's going to work closely, I think, with the quarterback because he's not a quarterback's coach. He's not Nathaniel Hackett, Luke Getsy, like those guys. And obviously, the other elephant in the room is that when Adam Gase went to Denver, he was a quarterback's coach for Peyton Manning. I know Adam. Adam was like, what am I going to teach Peyton Manning? There's a lot of work that he learned he learned a lot from Peyton Manning. He learned how to work and how to make sure that he was prepared. But as far as like what value are you going to give an Aaron Rodgers when he's in year 15 or 16? Like how much are you going to teach that guy when he knows the offense better than anybody on the planet? That's tough, right? And we had the same situation when I was in Green Bay with Darrell Bevell. Darrell Bevell was a young young coach, came in, and all of a sudden he's a quarterback coach for Brett Favre. And we all respected Bev because he works hard and everything, but in the back of your mind, he's had a good career in the National Football League. And in the back of your mind, though, you at that age, you go, well, it's kind of, you got to squint your eyes. It's kind of hard to imagine what that's supposed to look like. What value are you really adding? You could be a horsepower guy. Like, I could put together clips. I can tell you to turn to page 6, or, I put film together or whatever. But as far as coaching a legend, there's only a few people on the planet that are probably capable of doing that. And so, like, to have to find one of those guys is probably pretty hard, unless you have one of the very, very rare commodities of legendary player that is just begging to get coached and coached hard. Like, I remember, and I'm not in that status at all, but my second or third year in Carolina, we got a new line coach. And all I asked him when we had a meeting, Dave Magazine, he passed away last year, unfortunately. But all I asked at the meeting was, like, I need to be coached. And at this point, I'd had some postseason accolades. I'd, made some good money and everything. I was a good player in the league. But some guy, you want to be coached. But I knew that Mags had been around a lot longer than I had. And so that's sometimes the problem with the relationship, particularly with these quarterbacks who've been around forever. And, it's almost like dog years with these guys as far as how high their football IQ is. So I hope that helps. The last question, and I'll bring something on screen here to help us with this one. So, are there any insights you can gain from breaking down the salary cap by position? And then basically, what information could you gain under the surface level of these metrics? So what I wanted to show here is that this is over the cap. This is a great site for anybody who's out there who just wants to see all the information that has to do with their team or the league in general. And they break down positional spending for the salary cap by team, by position. So you can see you go left to right, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, entire offense, and then you go interior defensive line, edge, linebacker, safety, cornerback, entire defense. Okay, and I'm sure they have special teams. So, and they can go by year here. That's got 2013 to 20 projected in 2026. And what you'll find when you go through this is that you go down and find Green Bay here. And let's see if I can highlight it. Yep. So I highlight it here. And you look at Green Bay, they're kind of right in the middle of the road as far as their spend is $93 million. I'm in 2023. Their spend on offense is $101,756. Sorry, $101,756,535. And on defense, they're spending $90,672,938. Now, as you can imagine, the Packers, like, what can we gather from this? Okay, so $36 million at quarterback position, $11 million at the running back position, $5.5 million, and I'm obviously rounding here, at the wide receiver position, $3.8 at the tight end position, $44.5 million at the offensive line position. So you think on offense, okay, of course, Aaron Rodgers, there's a dead cap hit there. That's a ton of salary. Jordan Love's on his rookie contract, so it's just that $36 million, a fraction of that's Jordan Love. We get great. So what's the insights? We do a phenomenal job, bang for our buck wise, at the running back position with Jones and Dillon. Now, to put it in context, the Cowboys cap hit for 2023 in running backs is $29.8 million. Okay. The Niners, $15 million. The Titans, $19.2 million. The Colts, 9.8. The Chargers, 11.8. So we're spending 11.5. Aaron Jones is on his second contract. AJ is still on his first contract. His contract's cheap. It's going to be up soon. Aaron Jones is probably going to be on the team for one more year, and then maybe they have to make a decision because he's going to be 30 years old. But the projection there is great. The wide receiver room, when you look at the wide receiver room spending $5.5 million as I'm looking at this chart, that is the least amount spent in the entire National Football League, unless I can scroll down further and find another team. And it looks like it's not even close. Like every other team is expending at least 8 figures. So we're spending 5.5. Panthers are second lowest, I believe, at 13. You got Colts at 14. You start looking at the high side, 51 million for the Cardinals, 42 million for the Raiders, 42 million for the Broncos, 30 million for the Steelers. That's interesting. 37 million for the Dolphins. That's actually probably a pretty good value considering some of the other numbers. 34 for the Seahawks, 33 for the Rams. So as we go through this, I'll just finish up by saying you have 3.8 million for tight ends. That's got to be a low, or it's pretty darn close. I see a couple 5 millions in here. I see 1, 4, 4.8, 4.5. Here's a 3.8 with the Bucks. So yeah, you're right along at the lowest at wide receiver, at tight end. And then offensive line, there's some 19s. Let's see, the Titans are at 19 million. Seahawks are at 19 million. So they have 2 first-round picks playing tackle. That'll change, right? But they've done a good job drafting. What that really tells you is if you think your relative value as far as talent at the wide receiver position is good right now, which I think that everyone agrees that we have potential there, but from a Packers standpoint, you're probably looking to add. And at 3.8, you don't have a tight end you don't have a viable tight end in the locker room right now. What this just shows you quite simply is that for years and years and years, they have undervalued offense because of the quarterback position. The quarterback position, they have spent so much money, and I believe they are second to the Chiefs in cap hit this year. Now, listen, I know that's not an exact science because of the way contracts play out. Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes coming off a Super Bowl, multiple MVP guy, best player in the league, no doubt. Packers had maybe the second or third best player in the league, no Super Bowls in the last 10 years. So they have spent where they had to spend, but they've cut corners everywhere else. And so, when you talk about insights, that's what I gained from this. The offensive line is probably right around average. There's guys that are spending $19 million. There's guys that are spending $60 million with the Falcons because Lindstrom just signed his deal. The Bengals just spent all that money. They're still terrible, but they have $57 million cap hit. $55 million for the Browns. They have an incredible offensive line, very well coached. $60 million for the Texans. They have 2 tackles that are franchise player tackles. The best pass protecting left tackle in the league, and they have the kid Titus Howard is going to get a monster salary next year. So, and they have a first-round draft pick in Kenyon. They have guys. That's the strength of their team. So when you look at this overall, I think you have to look at what you feel is the relative value of the players on your team. Where are we spending money? Okay, why are we spending money there? Is it making a big enough difference on our roster? Interior defensive line. Here's a great interior defensive lineman for the Packers, $18 million. That's low. That's below average, right? The Ravens are spending 10. Everybody else, we've got 13 from the Bucks, 16 from the Panthers. Everybody else is over 20. Okay. Edge players, $19 million. Rashawn Gary is going to get an incredible contract. But right now, Preston's got a decent contract, but they've done really well getting value there. Despite, right? Now, you can say the thing about interior defensive lineman because Kenny Clark's in the mix, but they're still always looking for that second guy who's going to just do that incredible job. Maybe Devontae Wyatt's going to be that guy. We'll go all the way over to cornerback, and you see cornerback position, $25 million. Jared Alexander is worth every penny that they want to pay him, but only the Dolphins pay more. It looks like at $43 million, and they've got 2 guys that have been, Pro Bowl All-Pro guys. I know Byron Jones is gone now, but he's going to be in the cap hit, and obviously Xavier Howard. You see a lot of these other players, other teams, 37 million, 23, 25, 19, 27, 26, 12. There's a lot of money being spent there. So you're going to spend tons of money at certain positions. Usually you're going to draft a quarterback, premium tackle if you think it's left side or right side, cornerback, and edge rusher. Those are the pillars of any good football team. And so when you look at the Green Bay Packers in particular, and you look at their stats, you break down any of these stats, and you just got to go, are you giving your quarterback, particularly now looking at that cap, you're not giving your quarterback the weapons on offense that are going to be required to have what you hope is a breakout year, because you're spending no money at the wide receiver and tight end position, and you're spending average money at the running back position. You have great production there, and you know it, but Jordan Love's going to need weapons. What are you going to do about it? Right now, you don't really have the cap to do anything. So, anyways, guys, I hope that's been helpful. We'll get back to watching more tape next week. Gunnar had some good questions, man. I thought other people would like to hear those and hear the answers to those, at least from our perspective. I hope you enjoyed Block Party this week. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.